Good morning and welcome to Unfiltered Vision News, bringing you the news unfiltered Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern. My name is Dr. Ashaki Noni Nichols, and I will be your host. Thank you so much for joining me this morning here on Friday. Happy Friday, everyone. As Dr. C likes to say, happy Friday. I love that. I love that terminology. It's really, really nice. So I hope everybody has had a good week, stayed warm because it's been cold, very cold in different parts of the country. And Dr. Harriet, thank you so much for joining us on X and reposting the stream. And thank you, everybody, joining us on Facebook and YouTube. So let's start with our Kids Corner.
Humbled by a child.
Judas is one of the most hated names in the Bible. The guy who betrayed Jesus. But if I'm being real, haven't we all betrayed him too? It's easy to read about Judas and think, oh, I would never do that. But every time we choose comfort over obedience, or popularity over truth, or sin over surrender, that's betrayal too. It might look different, but it comes from the same place. Putting something else above Jesus. Hey, I'm Gray. I make Christian videos on the internet to help you grow closer to God. In Matthew 26, Judas sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. That's about $200 in today's money. He walked with Jesus, saw miracles, heard his teaching, but still traded him for something temporary. And honestly, I get it. We all have our own 30 pieces of silver. Maybe it's fitting in. Maybe it's control. Maybe it's because we want our way. Maybe it's that one sin that we keep going back to. But here's the thing. Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him. But he still washed his feet. That's the part that gets me. Jesus showed love to the one that would hurt him the most. So before we judge Judas, we have to look at ourselves. We've all betrayed Jesus at some point. With our words, with our pride, our choices. But the difference is what happens next. Judas ran from Jesus. But Peter, who also betrayed him, ran back. The cross proves this. Even if you betrayed him, he still loves you. Grace doesn't stop at betrayal. It actually starts there. So if you've messed up and think you're too far gone, don't run away, run back. Because Jesus already knew, and he still chose you. That's so amazing.
Grace doesn't stop at betrayal. It actually starts there. I love that line. God's mercies renew every morning. Amen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's very intense from such a young heart. It's like, wow. Because we've all been there, right? Every single day it's a choice. That is why in the book of Luke it says you have to pick up your cross daily. It's a daily decision, right? Daily, right? And we're all hoping we don't betray daily, but if it does happen, are you going to give up? Or are you going to start there, right? And do what's right. And Minnesota Fats, thank you so much for joining us on X and reposting the stream. Yeah. So with that, we are going to get into honoring God with our body. And so God, please protect and guard our thoughts. God, help me to fix my thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. So I will think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. God, please protect my ears and help me to listen to your voice. God, help me to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. God, please protect my eyes from sin's damage. God, I make a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully. God, please speak life over my mouth. God, set a guard over my mouth. Lord, keep watch over the doors of my lips. God, please help my hands to serve generously. God, help me to do good to everyone, and especially to those who belong to our family in the faith. God, please protect my reproductive organs. God, help me honor you with purity. God, help me to honor you with my body. And God, please protect my feet and help me walk in your path. God, let your word be a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. So you guys know, if you've been listening and joining me here, I try to read that every single morning just to set our hearts and our minds right. So I've been doing a lot of research, to the point where I don't know if you got for you guys, but have you ever done so much research? Oh, thank you, Spud, and amen, and good morning to you as well. You've done so much research that it's not like it comes full circle, but you're like, where did I start and how did I get here? That's how I feel because my goal, I've really just been trying to pick apart the 14th Amendment. It's very important to see what, SCOTUS might say. They, even though they're going to hear it, I mean, what if they decide, okay, if you were to, if you, the way you interpret it, I'm just, like I said, I'm just assuming, if you interpret it this way, then you might have to ratify it. Or if, you know, we're not going to make a decision on it, we're just going to let it stand. I mean, there's so many angles and ways and views that people have on the 14th Amendment. Like I said, just looking through the different debates that happened, I think there's like 2,000 pages or something ridiculous. And I mean, I'll send you guys a link on it. Like, it's crazy. Like, they did this 4 months. They really grappled with, if we do this, what does it look like? And what would be the outcome? And this is just my opinion. I really don't think when they put the 14th Amendment together to make people whole, because, the Dred Scott decision just kind of left it out there saying, we're not going to create a case to give people equal opportunity under the law, even though our First Amendment says that all men are created equal, right? So that's why the American Negro is a unique lineage of persons. Okay, and I have to set it up that way because it was specifically written, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, to make freed slaves and their descendants whole. Now, other people have benefited off of these amendments, right? And I think the founding fathers, they set it up that way, but I really don't think they thought and looked forward to it being abused, right? Because even, it has like equal protection under the law. We still had Jim Crow laws after the 14th Amendment was put in place, right? There was still redlining. There's still harms going on today that violate the American Negro. But people, will say, "Well, stop whining. Be glad you're here." And turn around and give people that are here illegally more rights. And use that same amendment to give them rights they shouldn't inherently have, saying, well, they have the right to due process, even though they're not citizens, just because they're on the soil. I mean, like I said, I really don't think they intended for the amendment to be abused the way it has. And like I said, that's just my opinion. And that's what I kept grappling with and going back to in my research. I was just like, wow, this is a trip. this is really a trip, how people interpreted it, didn't interpret it, cared, didn't care. I was just like, wow. So, Donald Trump has brought up a very hot button issue. Now, I know a lot of people view him as a racist and all these different things. He's such a racist. Why is he trying to protect Black Americans? Why is he trying to protect the American Negro? If he's such a racist, he would just let it continue. Like, I don't care if these other people come in here and railroad this particular lineage of people. What does it matter to me? That's not what's happening. That's the bigger question. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Hmm. Is it because maybe you will benefit? Do we know? Do we not know? It's going to address a lot of incidents, in my opinion, in this country that have happened that have been harmful to the American Negro, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Again, I really don't think I don't think the founding fathers or individuals that participated in drafting the Bill of Rights and the Constitution really saw that we would be where we're at today with people circumventing the Constitution through policy, through different agencies, right? To create what they want outside of the law, outside of the letter of the law. I really don't think they foresaw that, but that's where we are. And greetings, Dr. C. She says, greetings, founder. Happy Friday, like I said. And Tatas, good morning to you too. Thank you so much for joining us and reposting the stream. And Uncle Coolwater, thank you so much for joining us this morning and reposting the stream. So I'm just gonna play President Trump's video, and then we're gonna get into a little bit more of this research. And Uncle Coolwater says, how does a president say, I'm gonna help the Black American people without saying, I'm gonna help the Black American people? Good morning. I know. I know. The question is, does he want to help? Again, I don't think he would have brought it up if he didn't want to help. But let's check out this video.
Because that case was meant for the babies of slaves. And if you look at the dates on the case, it was exactly having to do with the Civil War. That case was not meant for some rich person coming from another country, putting a foot in our country, and all of a sudden their whole family becomes, United States citizens. That case is all about slaves, the babies of slaves. And it was a good reason for doing it. And that's all it was about. And people now are understanding it. It's been explained to them, and I think the court understands it too. That would be a devastating decision if we lose that case.
That court,
because our country cannot afford to house tens of millions of people that came in through birthright citizenship. When that happened, that was meant for the babies of slaves. And if you look at the exact dates that it was passed, it all had to do with the Civil War and the ending of the Civil War. It's that little period of time, and people now are starting to understand.
Yeah. So, that is his purview and platform on it, right? Like that's where he's at. He's like, this was for the babies of slaves. Now I know a lot of people are like, oh, we need to help him with his talking points and say, sir, it's actually for the descendants. It's okay to say descendants, but we know what he means, right? I know what you mean. So I use some different AI models. I tried Grok, I tried DeepSeek, and one I tried when I put Negro in there, it was like, that's really not a nice word. I'm like, can't use you because you're gonna have a different purview. And I'm like, it's on my birth certificate. What do you mean it's not a nice word? Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, it just depends on how you train the model. So really between DeepSeek and Grok, I was like, okay, I was really just trying to figure out the intent of the law, because sometimes there's a difference. You'll hear attorneys always talk about the spirit of the law, the intent of the law, the letter of the law, and what they mean by that is their assumption is when they say the spirit of the law, right? There was a not like an energy, but there was an excitement for the law in its intent to be one way, right? The spirit of the law. And then there's the intent of the law, literally the way it was written. And then there's just the legal binding. This amendment on its face was intended to make whole freed slaves and their descendants on its face. They talked about it, they debated it back and forth. And there were members in the Senate that had concerns, right? If we write it this way, this may be the outcome and what happens there. And if we write it this way, we might get this outcome, right? And so they were very cautious in what they were doing. And that's how I was reading it. So this is DeepSeek, right? And I asked it a standard question that I put together. I said, regarding the 14th Amendment, can you summarize the intent and interpretation of the law, right? Intent and interpretation. That's what I'm looking for, not the spirit of the law, like not how people were feeling, but the intent interpretation. So I said, please bring up quotes for Senator Howard and Cowan. Make sure to consolidate, because if you don't tell, you will get like a page or 3 pages of information with short outline. Note the disagreement that Black Americans have with how the amendment, sorry, I misspelled that, has been abused, and outline how Chip Roy's Pause Act, and I'm still kind of back and forth on the Pause Act, but I was like, well, in the Pause Act, and we'll get into it, it's basically looking at how a way to curb illegal immigration, right? That's what the Pause Act does, and really looking at protecting our borders, right? Not just the physical borders, but the administrative borders. So it brings up H-1B visas, chain migration, et cetera, et cetera. So could be a route to curb the abuse of the 14th Amendment while assisting the Negro community, right? So give a short outline, call to action to get the bill passed. Also mention the 14th Amendment case before the Supreme Court and how it all ties together. So I was just like, let's just kind of look at it from that purview. And Tata says, people are not trying to understand because it's talking about us specifically, and some of our people are being willfully ignorant. Yeah, it's crazy because even in my research, and this was really wild because I didn't know this, the NAACP is actually advocating for immigrants to be here according to the 14th Amendment. They're not advocating for it to protect us. They're advocating for it to protect people that are here illegally on the soils. Wow. That also came up in some of our research. I was like, wait a minute. You're advocating against us? Wow. Yeah, like I said, and that was I don't think that happened in Grok and in DeepSeek, but it was like in another AI model I was using. I was like I said, but it was, sometimes you see things, and even though it was disheartening, it was cool because I was like, wow, I didn't know that. I really didn't know that they were lobbying and advocating for people that are here illegally. But they are, because it's the due process, right? Protection under the law. This is after, persons born or naturalized, right? This is later on in the 14th Amendment that they're arguing for illegal immigration. It's very crazy. And sincerely, Lawless, happy Friday, or Friday founder. Happy Friday and Friday to you too as well. So, so here's some of the original quotes, right? And this was ratified July 9th, 1868. So they had to ratify the Constitution in order for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to be done. Now, the question is, are we going to have to do that again if they are trying to really make this happen? Because the Supreme Court could say, well, we could make a decision on this particular case, and they already brought this up. Are we going to have to continue to make decisions on these cases? Or they might have to kick it back and say, you know what, Congress, this may take a ratification of the Constitution to clearly outline under the 14th 14th Amendment, who it's for, what its intent is, right? And who does not have access to it. So let's just say, and I'm just using this as an example, I'm not saying this will happen. They ratify the 14th Amendment and they say, okay, any persons born or naturalized, this applies to, right? I don't know why the founding fathers didn't do this. You can say this applies to, because they said who it didn't apply to, right? Dignitaries and all that. But you can say this applies to descendants of emancipated slaves, right? Or individuals that are born to persons that are a U.S. citizen or naturalized. Because if you do that, that eradicates this whole I had a baby on the soil, they're United States citizen. That's over. But we're going to get into why that didn't happen and the questions around that, right? Because they could have probably written it that way, but they didn't. And that we're going to get into that why. So Senator Jacob Howard on May 23rd, 1866, on the citizenship clause, the amendment which I have offered is simply declaratory of what I regard as the law of the land already, that every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. Okay? So he's just like, what, this is, this is the law of the land, right? But see, at that time, they didn't have massive immigration. They had very strong borders. They didn't have everybody just running over because you couldn't. You couldn't just come to the United States and be like, I'm here. What's up? Like, you couldn't do that. You just couldn't do it. Okay? We had very strong borders at that time. So on the privileges or immunities clause, it will, if adopted by the states, now here we go, if adopted by the states, forever disable every one of them from passing laws trenching upon those fundamental rights and privileges which pertain to citizens of the United States. Okay. So his concern was, if we do this, we have to make sure that the states can't reject it, right? Just saying. And they can't mess with people. They can't say, well, you were born here in Indiana, not Missouri, and our laws say this and not that, or we are going to accept you even if you're not a citizen. I mean, just weird stuff, right? That was his concern. Now, Senator Edward Cowan, he had a dissenting view. He expressed concern over expansive birthright citizenship. Now, this term birthright didn't come up until later in the 1900s. So I need people to understand that this term, which is legalese, was not a part of the constitutional conversation. It didn't come up when they were debating this. This is a colloquialism, right? Or legalese that people came up with later. And it was actually codified in a statute that we'll get into. So understand, they weren't talking from a term of birthright citizenship that we know of today. They were talking about the 14th Amendment and the right of birth on the soil, right? So asking if it would apply to children of Chinese or gypsies born in this country. So even then, there was a concern. Just saying. Now, his objections highlighted early disagreements about the scope of the clause, which Howard's interpretation aimed to make broad and inclusive. So Howard was like, we need to make this broad enough and inclusive enough so to make sure that these emancipated slaves and their descendants are protected, right? And any other persons outside of them born on the soil. Again, they were not intending for the law to be abused by people. And that's where we are today, is the abuse, right? So, broke down disagreement from Black America on the abuse of the amendment. Many Black legal scholars and civil rights advocates argued the 14th Amendment's core promise of equal protection and substantive citizenship has been persistently abused through neglect and misinterpretation. The second founding betrayed the amendment's privileges or immunities clause was effectively nullified by the slaughterhouse cases, stripping it of its power to protect substantive economic and civil rights, right? This is how we get back to 1964 and having to redo this again, by the way. Side note. So, separate but equal, right? Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, sanctioning of segregation under a separate but equal doctrine was a direct perversion of the Equal Protection Clause because, again, we are unique. We had to be written into the Constitution for people to respect us, and they still didn't. They were still like, no, you're still not a human. Like, what? First of all, your Constitution says all men. It doesn't say certain men. It doesn't say these men. It doesn't say those men. It says all men are created equal, but you're still causing harm. It's crazy. So, modern disparities. Today, the amendment's failure to ensure equal outcomes in practice, evidenced by systemic disparities in criminal justice, education, and wealth, is seen as a continuing abuse by under enforcement, allowing states to perpetrate inequity. And it happens, right? And the Democrats think, well, we're doing a good service by, allowing these poor people that are asylum seekers and refugees, and we have to help them, even though you're hurting the descendants of the people it was intended to protect. And this is why people are angry with you. This is why people are upset with people that are in the Democratic Party. I'm just saying. And people with that kind of mindset. We want to take care of everybody else, even though this was specifically written for you and we can benefit from it. We're still going to disregard you, treat you badly, and put people over you. It is wild and crazy, but I wish I was wrong. And sweet sister, thank you so much for reposting the stream and joining us this morning. Now, again, this is kind of a Cliff Note version. I've got other questions that I asked Grok and gone through all of these different scenarios, right? Because I was like, wow, it was, again, very interesting and fascinating to me. But, sometimes I'll get into research and I'm like, oops, I got to go. I gotta start the show. Now, Chip Roy on November. Oh, wow. He did this in 2023. And I guess he revamped it in 2025. But in 2023, he did a Protection Americans from Unlawful Sanctuary Environments Act, proposes to withhold federal funding from jurisdictions that violate Title 8, Section 1324, harboring illegal aliens. So this was a conversation under the previous administration because of the influx and how he was like, wow, this is crazy, that people are doing what they're doing. So the tie to the 14th Amendment, proponents argue that unchecked illegal immigration and sanctuary policies abuse the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause by creating an incentive for birth tourism and irregular migration, which they claim dilutes the value of citizenship and strains resources intended for lawful residents, including Black Americans. Yeah. So I don't know if any of you guys know Chip Roy. He's funny to me. He looks like he probably played football. He's just this tall, burly guy. And I remember the first time I heard him on the floor, and he was just like, how am I going to go home and tell my constituents we've done nothing? I was like, well, I like this guy. He's honest. But he's been kind of fighting a battle in silence. because you really don't hear a lot from him or what he's doing unless you follow him, right? Unless somebody says, "Hey, have you heard about your boy?" and this that, you wouldn't know, right? So, arguing for assisting the Black community, supporters contend that by securing the border and enforcing immigration law, the Pause Act would protect domestic labor markets and community resources, potentially benefiting historically marginalized Black workers who face job competition and underfunded public resources. It frames the issue as one of upholding the rule of law and protecting the integrity of citizenship. Now, here we fast forward to um, the Trump case. Now, this statute, the Pause Act, HR 6225, it was introduced November of this year, right? So the previous one that they were talking about, let me go back to it. The Protection Americas from Unlawful Sanctuary Act, that is a different one. So I just want to let you guys know they're not the same. This one was introduced this year, but it's kind of similar to what he did before. Let me see. Getting back to, yes, so now the Trump administration, whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the insurrectionist disqualification clause, can be used by states to disqualify can. Okay, well, anyway, why it ties in. This case showcases the ongoing battle over the amendment's interpretation and enforcement, right? Just as the Equal Protection Clause, there is sharp dispute over who can enforce Section 3, right? And under what standard. The court's ruling will define the practical power of a key, long dormant section of the 14th Amendment. So we've got people. So this amendment, in my opinion, has been contentious since its inception, because there were the southern states, and that's argued. And I'll make sure that I attach the debate and the argument so you guys can, on your own look through it. And it was very contentious because the southern states, they didn't want to give up slavery. The northern states, they were like, "Hey, we just fought this war to get rid of this stuff. Like, what are you guys doing?" Right? And then there were other people in between. But historically, we're never taught this stuff. We just glaze over it and be like, "Oh, Black people, you're fine. Get over it. You got stuff." Okay, we got stuff. It's not working. It's like giving you a car with flat tires and no transmission and saying, "But at least you have a car," but it doesn't work. I can't drive it. I can't use it. What good is it if I can't use it? And that's the problem that we've always had in this country. It has been this knee-jerk reaction, start, stop, really not outlining the intent. And then you get other people who want to reinterpret it in their own way, right? That serves their political leaning at this point. Like, look, people are just out in the open with it. They don't care. Look, I feel bad for a lot of these children that are literally being used by people coming over here illegally to have anchor babies. I feel bad for the babies because people have taken advantage of our kindness in a nefarious way, and nobody says anything or calls them on it. They get coddled and told, "Oh, you poor refugee asylum seeker. Oh, you poor thing. You came over here and now you have a baby. Here's everything." When you have citizens on the soil already that are American citizens, true American citizens, that you won't even do that for. Like, what? That's a big problem. A big problem. So it gave me some key dates, the debates, outlining. It gave a call to action for HR 6225, and we'll get back to that. And in summary, it says the 14th Amendment remains a central battleground in American law and politics. Its original intent to create a national protected citizenship classes, clashes with narrow judicial interpretations and modern enforcement disputes. Black Americans' grievance centers on the abuse of its equal protection promise, right? The Pause Act represents a legislative attempt to address an alleged abuse of the citizenship clause, right, through immigration policy. Simultaneously, Trump Anderson represents a judicial showdown over the insurrection clause. Together, they demonstrate that the fight over the 14th Amendment's meaning, enforcement, and legacy is ongoing, spanning from citizenship and equality to the very grounds for disqualifying officials, right? So they wanted to say this is why they called it an insurrection. I think everything was bland. It was like, well, if we say he did an insurrection act, he can be disqualified. Da, da, da. And it was like, okay, well, he wasn't found guilty of an insurrection. So, and there was a case. There was a case that was brought. He wasn't found guilty, but there was a case that was brought. And I was like, even if he was in prison, he could still run the country from jail. Okay. But they were like, but the insurrection clause would disqualify him. It would disqualify him, but it didn't happen. So that's why there was all the lawfare. Because there's nothing in our Constitution that says if you're in jail, you can't be the president. There's nothing that says that. You can be in prison, be the president, but you just can't vote in a federal election. That's it. Like that's your punishment. Oh, and by the way, you're a slave. So we would have the first president that was slave. Just saying. If we follow the letter of the law. Yeah, there's that. Now, I did look at the New Deal kind of briefly because I really didn't think it was anything that helped Black America, but there was an argument for it. I was like, okay. And I said, are there any cases in United States history where naturalized citizens were removed from the United States? And I wanted to bring this back up because, again, in my opinion, I really do think those that were working on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right, their intent, they didn't see us where we are right now, in my opinion. But Cowan, he was just kind of like, well, what about these gypsies and Chinese people? I mean, he was worried just about this specific group, but I could kind of see where he was coming from. He was just kind of like, what happens if they run amok? We've got to frame this in a way that it can't be taken advantage of, right? So that's really what they were trying to do and come up with. But it was just like, how do we get there? Yeah. And I just really want to impress upon you guys that they had mass denaturalization. Okay. The Act of 1906 and later 1940 National Act followed the government to cancel naturalization certificate obtained by fraud, or if the person was deemed to have shown lack of attachment to the Constitution. That's a very broad standard, still true today. Right. And this is where people, and I'll have to bring her up, Ilhan Omar. This is where they're arguing she is not in alignment with the Constitution. She lacks an attachment to the Constitution, even though she likes to quote and say, well, I just can't, and I just can't. Like, ma'am, you are out here caping for Somalia, not America. And you will stand up proudly and say, I'm a Somali woman. Why are you here? You're not talking about America. See, you keep thinking that's a flex to tell us you're Somali. We know. Like, we know. We can look at you and tell you are not a Negro. Like, we know. We get it. But you never stand up and say, I'm an American who is a refugee of Somalia. No. You're Somali first. That's a problem for everybody because you're in Congress. And you've continued to fight for Somalia, not America. Show me the record. Show me where you've actually fought for American people outside of Minnesota. You're still in Congress. Because see, you like to flex. and say, well, the House, we have the power of the purse, and we have this and we have that. Great flex. Who are you helping? What are you doing? Because see, what you do extends outside of your district, and it affects the rest of us here in America. Who are you helping? You're not helping Americans. In my opinion, you lack attachment to the Constitution, period. Okay? And when you really look at this, there was a point in time when I'm trying to find it. Let me see. There's something I'm really trying to find in here. Maybe I passed it. But basically, they weren't taking people in from other countries, right? So, yeah, there was a denaturalization. Thousands of naturalized citizens, German, Italian, 1920s, the World War IIs, the Cold War era. But there was a time in this country where they weren't taking people in from all over the world. They just weren't. And if they were taking people in, it was in very small numbers. It was very finite. They did not want an influx of people in the United States. So they took their time in bringing people in and making sure that they were vetted, that they were going to be American citizens. But that's why they had that mass deportation or denaturalization, because they did not want people here that did not align. Hey, I can't find that argument. But then I wanted to also explore a little bit of Senator Howard's stance on general welfare. Now, the feedback was it didn't directly reference the discussion between the 14th Amendment and general welfare, right? But Howard emphasized that the 14th Amendment addressed this gap by restraining states from violating fundamental rights, and through Section 5, granting Congress explicit enforcement power. So here's a direct affirmative delegation of power to Congress to carry out all the principles of these guarantees, a power not found in the Constitution. And this is something that he said in reference. Okay. So additionally, in defining the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, Howard approvingly quoted Justice Brashad Washington's opinion in Corfield and Coriel in 1823, which described these as fundamental rights, subject nevertheless to such restraints as the government may justly prescribe for the general good of the whole. This reflects Howard's view that individual liberties are protected but can be regulated for the broader public good, aligning conceptually with the idea of general welfare as a legitimate governmental consideration, though not tied to the specific article and clause. So he was always thinking about the general welfare of people, right, in writing these laws and carrying this out. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to just, like I said, go through a little bit more of the research that I did, and we'll get into some more news. So thank you so much for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News for Prayer with Friday, and I will see you guys on the other side.
A life empowered is closer than you think. We're all looking for a better way. Reimagine what's next with a new sense of exuberance. Why not power on like you mean it? Or power off blissfully? A better sleep is a better awake. You've never moved like this before. With the energy nature intended. Imagine reprogramming the way you look at the speed of science. At longevity. At exhilaration. It's next level rejuvenation. Take your well-being from the inside out and outside in. The light within is ready to ignite. Be the light. LifeWave.
Thank you so much for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News, bringing you the news unfiltered Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern. My name is Dr. Ashaki Noni Nichols, and I will be your host. Now, this is some of the research that I did in Grok. So I asked the same question, pretty much. Yeah, I just cut and paste, and I was like, well, what does Grok have to say about this? Because what I'm learning, depending on the language learning model you are going to get different responses, because some of them do pull aggregated resources from different locations. I'm a person, I like research. I'm a paralegal. So I'm looking at different things. I'm like, I know there should be certain bits of information that are just standard, right? If I get any extra, that's great. If I get less, I'm like, what's that? Right? So it pretty much gave me the same summary, but it mentioned Dred Scott, right? It highlighted it, right? And so the core intent, right? It actually mentioned this as the core intent, ratified to overturn Dred Scott versus Stanford, right? Granting citizenship to freed slaves and their descendants, extend Bill of Rights protections against state abuses. What? What? So how did Jim Crow happen? Yeah, that's a big question, right? Ensure equal protection, due process, and citizenship for those born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. We're kind of familiar with that line, right? Framers emphasized jurisdiction as full allegiance, not mere presence. So that's interesting, right? How does a baby have full allegiance? But then again, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to open up that Pandora's box, but it still ran through my head. Okay. Excluding children of foreign diplomats, right? So they were excluded from the 14th Amendment, or invading armies. So if somebody invaded and there was their intention, they would be excluded, right? But affirming birthright for those under U.S. legal obligations. And here's where we get back to just, they call it JOS, soil, right? Which interpreted means on the soil. So if you're born here on the soil, legally, they see you as legal, even if your parents are here illegally. Now, they didn't equate somebody coming over here illegally to somebody invading armies. But let's just say, for the sake of argument and hypothetically, they said, okay, people coming here with the illegal intent, right? To have a person, even if they're not a legal citizen, right? I'm just like throwing out some words, but let's just say, right? Could they be considered an invading army of persons? Could they fall under that framing, because they're not coming here with a righteous intent? Let me just say that. Let me frame it that way. Their intentions are not righteous or pure. They have an evil intent to come here, have a baby, and attach that baby to the soil so they can benefit. To me, that's war. And the reason why I say that, because war is with words, right? Or it can be with actions. It doesn't necessarily have to be with bullets and tanks. But a war is a debate that you basically win. I'm just saying that's how war is. Who's going to win this, offensive? And in my opinion, when people come over here illegally with the intention, okay, and that's the problem. Because people are like, well, how do you know they intended to come over? Because they came over here like 2 weeks due, and they came over the border illegally. And they knew as long as they got here and had a baby, we're under obligation to protect that child because that child is now a U.S. a citizen. That's war. In my opinion, that could be an invading army because where are we at right now? Trump said it was an invasion, and it's been an invasion. It's been an invasion prior to 1980. Was it 80? That was early 90s, actually. Yeah, it was before Clinton, where Reagan did amnesty, right? Because they were like, well, there's so many people here, we can't get them off. So we'll do amnesty this one time. So they had blanket amnesty. They allowed all these people in here, but then the invasion kept happening. So you can't say that it's unintentional. It's intentional. But are they looking at that argument? I don't know. So Senator Jacob Howard, right? Again, right, this person, now this is another one of his quotes. Every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to the jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. Now here, he's not defining immigration status of the parents. He's just saying if you're born here, that's it. You are a citizen, right? He stressed the amendment's goal. Now, this is where you get into the spirit of the law, because that's the goal. The great object of the first section is to restrain the power of the states and compel them at all times to respect these great fundamental guarantees, empowering Congress via Section 5 for enforcement. So he wanted to make sure that no matter where freed slaves were, right, that they would not be denied being citizens, because this is who it's written for right now. Okay. But he still had to expand it just in case there was somebody who wasn't Black, right? Who wasn't a Negro. They wanted to make sure when we put this in place, it's going to protect freed slaves and everyone else. Okay. Again, people have abused it. And in my opinion, that's an invading army. Now, Senator Edward Cowan warned of unintended expansion if a traveler comes from Ethiopia, right? He is entitled, right, to the protection of the laws, but he is not a citizen in the ordinary acceptation of the world. He feared it would grant citizenship to children of Chinese immigrants or gypsies, asking, is the United States to determine that they are to be citizens, highlighting limits on jurisdiction for non-allegiant foreigners. So he even brought it up. He was like, well, so what if somebody's from over here? Are they entitled to this? So the question was asked, right? Again, they had a whole debate. So in 1866, Joint Committee drafts amendment, Reconstruction, focuses on securing Black citizenship post-slavery. So that was their focus. Now, 1868, they also brought up Wong Kim Ark. This is where the children of legal immigrants, right? That was brought up. Now, modern interpretation, most born children, but critics argue it strays from framers' intent by including children of undocumented entrants, or what they call anchor babies, diluting protections resources for intended beneficiaries, right? Because his parents, I think they were, I have to double check to see if they were nationals or not. If anybody in the chat knows that, help me out. Like I said, I've been researching so much, my brain is like buzzing. But yeah. So as you can see, down the line and without challenge, people have been abusing the 14th Amendment. So it suits them. Just saying. Now, many Black leaders and scholars, right, because like I said, I think it's abuse, contend the clause meant exclusively for descendants of enslaved Africans has been abused. And it's not Africans, it's Negroes. Okay. So don't pay attention to Grok. Grok is just trying to be correct. Okay. Via expansion birthright rulings enabling mass immigration that strains welfare, jobs, and affirmative action programs originally aimed at redressing slavery's legacy. This dilution allegedly perpetuates economic disparities for Black communities, diverting billions in benefits, chain migration from those the amendment targeted. So, as much as it was meant to make us whole, people kept shoehorning themselves in to take advantage of it and still cause harm to freed, emancipated slaves and their descendants. Now, the Pause Act, again, this was the act that Chip Roy introduced for the intent of his bill. It pauses inflows, reducing U.S. born children of non-permanent residents, aligning with framers' jurisdiction limits, right? Like you see how Calvin brought up, like, what if somebody's from Ethiopia? Like, what are we talking about, right? Without amending Constitution, complements SCOTUS's review, but legislatively narrowing eligibility gaps exploited post Won Kim arc. So everybody's been abusing it, but not really calling people on it. Because whenever it's challenged, people go, well, what about this guy? And when SCOTUS heard it the first time, I want to say it was Justice Sotomayor. She actually brought it up. She said, well, if we go on this way, and you're looking at that case was in a specific state. So are we looking at this at the state level, or are we looking at this on a wider scale of, every state? Because if you're looking at it at the state level, we'll be here like in perpetuity trying to challenge each state and, citizenship literally in each state. Can't do that. And, and this is just my thought on it. You abused the 14th Amendment. It was improperly used to grant that person citizenship, which has kicked down the door for all of this illegal immigration that we see. So for it to have happened and all of this, I should say, all of these bad things happening afterwards, right? You messed up. It was messed up and it should have never happened. They should have nipped this in the bud with that decision. Now, in my opinion, could SCOTUS, if SCOTUS were to overturn that decision from Won Kim arc, let's just say, hypothetically, they overturn it and they say, okay, this was an isolated state incident that cannot be applied, right? Universally. I'm just saying, can't be applied universally because it was an isolated incident. In my opinion, could they overturn it and say the 14th Amendment was misinterpreted and this person should have never been allowed citizenship? They could have argued, right, that they were citizen, they were born here, but they were born to people that were not U.S. citizens. I want to say, like I said, I think they were nationals. I'm gonna have to look that up real quick to like settle my brain. But like I said, I'm just talking hypothetically. If they were nationals, let's just say, they're eliminated because the 14th Amendment actually outlines that and says, okay, this does not apply to foreign nationals. So if you're a foreign national, it doesn't apply to you. Your kid is not a U.S. citizen. They are under the jurisdiction that you're under. You're just kind of visiting here. But if his parents were not citizens, again, hypothetical, because I have to look it up. His parents were not citizens. Again, could there have been a further challenge? Right? No, because remember, Cowan brought it up. What happens with the Chinese people? We do not want this. We do not want this. What happens? So it could have went a different way. It could have went a way of, no, they were not citizens. This person born to him, therefore, is not a citizen, even though born on the soil. That would mean every person born to somebody here illegally, right? Because nationals, like I said, they were already excluded. They would not be able to use it in that way. That's kind of it. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. But that's what kicked this whole thing off. And this is what they all run to. But like I said, Sotomayor, she brought up a very good point. Is this going to be broad, or is it going to be a state by state case? Because the case that was brought, because Trump addressed it, executive order, and then a state brought a case to the Supreme Court trying to block what he's doing. Congress didn't bring this to him because Congress can't do that. That's why we have 3 branches of government. And like I said, it gets very crazy, it gets very sticky. And user, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and morning to you too. Happy Friday. Like I said, it gets very interesting. So challenges Trump's EO denying birthright to children of undocumented temporary visa holders, arguing it violates plain text in Wong Kim Ark lower courts, right? Blocked it as unconstitutional. Oral arguments are likely in 2026. Ruling could clarify jurisdiction, right? Potentially upholding limits. The Pause Act supports this by pausing exploitation during litigation, offering legislative backups if SCOTUS narrows birthright. Restoring amendments focus on loyal citizens and Black redress without overreach. You know, just getting it back in alignment. Now, if, I'm just saying, and these are conversations I will probably have offline. And Black Delegation, thank you so much for joining us here on Unfiltered Vision News. This is Grand Rising to you too. So if we were to decide to, back up Chip Roy with HR 6225, it could be a way to bring awareness and attention to individuals abusing the 14th Amendment. Because at this juncture, I don't think that people are innocently coming into our country en masse, right? Having babies here and getting assistance. Now, and that's another interesting thing, because you'll go into some of these LLMs and you'll say, hey, are migrants getting welfare? And they'll say, and the chats will say no. Well, the reason why they say no is because, yes, the parents aren't getting the resources because they're illegal, but the children are, because they are considered citizens. So you would have to rephrase the question: are babies born to those that are undocumented getting resources, the answer is probably going to be a little bit different, right? Because one of those things, ipso facto, they have to be here as parents to take care of their kids. You can't deport the parents of the children because they're U.S. citizens. See how that works? Again, that's an invasion. It's war. You're an invader. You are not coming here righteously to do anything by righteous gain or means. You have literally come here. And a lot of them, I want to say it was coordinated. You know, I don't know if you guys remember seeing the films of just like masses of people coming in through the gates, busting down the borders, the CBP, border protection, they couldn't do anything, right? Because they were so overwhelmed with military aged men. They weren't with families, they were military aged men. So all these people are still in our country, and ICE is trying to remove them. And we got, again, that's like a whole nother thing that I can go down. So we were invaded. So, you know, President Trump rightfully did put in place the invasion, right? And the terrorist, I want to say act of 1798. It was either 1798 or 1789. Oh, and you just says, plus lifting the wire to let them in, right? We all saw that lifting of the barbed wire. People just standing there like, come on through. And they were just rolling through. Like en masse. What were we doing? Well, there was previous administration was doing that and lying to people and saying, nobody's doing that, nobody's doing that. And when Trump shut it down, everybody's like, wait, oh, don't do that. So what was happening? Were we being invaded or weren't we? And if we were, again, I'm asking you hypothetical, not a theoretical question, but hypothetically, if we were being invaded, then, and only then, in my opinion, does it apply to say we were being invaded? Okay. Again, that's just my opinion. I feel that we were definitely invaded because of the way it went down. Our, you know, they're not, I always try not to call them the founding fathers, but I want to say the framers. There we go. The framers of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? Because it goes back to that question of gypsies and Chinese immigrants. I mean, it was very specific what they were saying, right? Limits on jurisdiction of non-allegiant foreigners. So are these people allegiant to us or not? They're not. They're still speaking their own language. They're flying their flags. I mean, what are we doing? But again, hypothetically, we let people in here within our borders that invaded our country. So again, if you look at it from that purview of invasion, right? Not in alignment. What's going on? Now, there were people that said that they were asylum seekers. Well, if you're seeking asylum from Honduras, we're not the closest country to you. You're supposed to seek asylum from the nearest place next to you. And then at that, there's another question. Is there war going on in that area? Because that's part of the reason you have people seeking asylum and people that are refugees, right? And those people are supposed to be actually given classifications and be allowed. And we can, you know what? We can actually use the country of Somalia as an example, because they were granted refugee status. The people of Somalia just didn't come here to the United States. They were granted refugee status, and that's how refugee status is supposed to work, as well as asylum status. But people were told and coached, and this is on record, say asylum, say refugee, you'll get let in. And that was the policy at the time. Okay. And there were no questions asked. That's how we got this invasion. And it was, and, up until January of this year, it was an invasion. It is what it is, was what it was. Now, again, in arguments, in my opinion, before SCOTUS, could they say, hey, there was an invasion and these people did not have the intention of coming here to actually be citizens of our country, because we have over 300 ports of legal entry. Why didn't they just do it legally? We still have legal immigration. It's not like you cannot become a citizen of the United States. You can legally. So a whole bunch of people apply for legal status. So the question becomes, why did you feel the need to come in illegally, in mass? Why? When you had no intention of assimilation, when you had no intention of doing anything properly. It goes back to that question. Why are you here? And why were people given benefits? Oh, that's right, because they had a child on this soil who is now an American citizen. But again, in my opinion, it still goes back to the intent. And that, there's another argument that says, well, these people, they were just intending to be safe from the countries they were in. I'm just saying, I'm just making an argument, just throwing it out there. And if that's the case, if that is truly the case, and you were fleeing, right, for your freedom, why were you fleeing with your freedom pregnant? Couple weeks due, intentionally coming over here when you've been in this country for decades, most of your life. But now you got to get over here to the United States from Honduras, not stopping in Mexico or any of the other neighboring countries, Panama, whatever. But you got to get here. I honestly think the intent was to invade. The intent was nothing else. And with these people not being able to really communicate well, and, because they don't know English that well. And in their native tongue, translation, things get lost in translation. But hey, again, it still goes back to intent. It still goes back to this right here is what I'm looking at. Framers emphasized jurisdiction as full allegiance, not mere presence. Excluding children of foreign diplomats, which you said, or invading armies. Could the people that have completely, come over here be considered invading armies? Yeah, but affirming birthright for those under U.S. legal obligations. Could they be considered invading armies? Like I said, that is the bigger question. Yeah, because to be racist means, and let's and I'll see your question under there, user. You have to be involved in an act of racism, right? So saying that someone invaded your country, that doesn't make you a racist. That's just stating, you know, it could be just stating an opinion, right? Because I don't know. I'm just putting it out there, right? I'm just putting that out there because of the way people came in mass. It's different when people are kind of, trickling in here and there, and you're like, why aren't these people coming through the proper port of entry if we have over 300 ports of entry, legal entry? No one ever says you cannot come into the United States. People just want you to come here legally. The question becomes, why did they come here illegally and in mass? Those two questions. And what I'm saying is, with those two questions, you could consider them an invading army. Not army in the sense of, weapons, guns, tanks, from a country that is considered an enemy of the United States. I'm talking about an invading army in the sense of coming in mass with ill intent and no intent to assimilate within America. Because again, you see people flying the flags of their country here in perpetuity, with impunity, as if it is their right. And a lot of people say, well, they do have freedom of speech. You do have freedom of speech. But if you are going to fly the flag of another country, you need to go to that other country, because when we see that here, that is a declaration of war or of being conquered. That's a problem. Minnesota, they decided to change their state flag to incorporate the Somali flag, which they can totally do that within their state if that's what they want to do. But it doesn't fly over Old Glory. Okay. It does not fly over our American flag. Because that states we are in America and we are free. It's very interesting to me how people will fight to get here, and then once they get here, they completely disrespect the country. That lets me know that they are an invading army, because they have no intention to assimilate. Again, it's an argument. In my opinion, I think it's something that can be used. Maybe they will, maybe they won't use it. I hope they do. I hope the lawyers for the Trump administration, I really do hope that they look to different ways of, presenting a fair argument. Because, like I said, we're all about legal immigration, because what I don't like seeing is I don't like seeing and hearing thousands of children are missing, right? I'm glad they found like 62,000 children, but there was over 300,000 children that were missing. We don't know what happened to these children because they weren't here. Their parents weren't here legally. And when we're talking about children that were already born before they came over to America. So they were 2, 3 years old. You hear about the young children being passed back and forth over the border, past to Mexico, then back to California. The CBP can't say anything about it, and they see these kids going back and forth. They know trafficking is going on, but they were told to stand down. That happened too. We don't talk about that part. Those things happened. So is it okay if abuse goes on our watch? I mean, it's just, there's so many things tied to this. And again, that's how I can look at it in the framing of an invading army. A war where there was human, right, ballistics being used, whether they were children or men or women. It's very, Crazy. Look into the finders. You'll be shocked. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, it's very sad. Like I said, what's happened not only in the United States but around the world. I mean, it's not only happening here. Those are the things that we have to realize. The mass immigration, it just didn't happen here. But I think when it happened here, because we do have the freedom of speech that we have, we, the people, have been able to talk about it, bring it to light, and say how displeased we are with it and demanding that our Congress actually do something about it. And you know what? Our Congress is divided on it. Our Congress is divided on it. They, part of them are okay with this mass immigration, telling us, like, how dare you be so racist about these people just seeking a better life coming in? What? How does racism, that doesn't even equate. We have legal ports of entry. Why can't they just come legally? But you don't want to address that question. But you're okay with people completely violating and disregarding the law. Because here's the thing. If you start that way, then your intentions are to never assimilate or ever really truly follow our laws. Just saying. There can still be an argument made for this. So with that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into our prayer for the weekend, where we pray Thanksgiving and cover. So again, thank you so much for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News, and we will see you on the other side.
At All Sides, we believe we give bias ratings for hundreds of media outlets. By freeing people from filter bubbles and providing different perspectives, we can all be better equipped to understand the world and each other. So how do we do?
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News, bringing you the news unfiltered Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern. My name is Dr. Ashaki Noni Nichols, and I will be your host. Thanks again. And Mark from the Soil, thank you so much for joining us on X and reposting the stream. So let's get into a little bit of news from all sides before we get into our prayer. So we've got the U.S. trade deficit hits 5-year low. Okay. In September. Wow. Okay. So the U.S. trade deficit dropped 10.9% to $52.8 billion in September, its lowest level in 5 years, to Commerce Department data released Thursday. So meanwhile, exports rose significantly than imports. So overall, exports climbed 3% to $289.3 billion, while imports increased by more than a modest 0.6% to 342.1 billion. The surge in exports was largely led by industrial supplies and consumer goods, including a significant 6.1 billion increase in non-monetary gold shipments back overseas. In inflation adjustment terms, the real goods deficit fell by 5.6%. These made up most of the total 8.4 billion rise in exports. Imports and computers and accessories declined by 2.7 billion, but was offset by a 12.9 billion resurgence in pharmaceutical imports, which some economists attribute to earlier threats by President Trump to impose tariffs on branded drugs. The trade deficit with China also narrowly by 4 billion to 11.4 billion as Chinese imports fell and U.S. exports to China rose slightly. Okay, and Dexter, thank you so much for joining us. So for context, the data, which was delayed due to the government shutdown, highlights shifting global trade flows influenced by Trump tariff actions. Administration officials argue the data reflects the kind of trade balance adjustment Trump had has pursued to enhance American competitiveness. However, some economists caution against reading too much into the data, noting the decline was almost entirely due to the gold movements and arguing that a nation's trade balance is ultimately driven by its saving and investment patterns, not just tariffs, right? So I know a lot of people are like, yeah, the tariffs. It's like we're really, we're seeing how it's shaking out, but I don't know how much it's going to shake out in our benefit, and time will tell, right? I think maybe not this time next year, but May, in my opinion, because they there was like that knee jerk reaction with the tariffs. Remember, like it was they're going, they're not, they're going, they're not, they're going, they're not. So they really didn't get going till like midsummer. So we really won't, in my opinion. I just don't think we'll see the results of it. But several outlets across the political spectrum, including Epic Times, that's right, Bloomberg Left, called the drop a surprise. Reuters, which is center, said the contraction was far below the 63.3 billion forecast by economists they polled. The Wall Street Journal, which is center, noted the year-to-date trade deficit is still 17% larger than in the first 9 months of 2024, partially fueled by companies stocking up on imports before tariffs were imposed. Right. Right rated outlets more often attributed the decline to Trump's tariffs, with Epoch Times, Breitbart Right, and National Pulse Right contextualizing the drop in the Trump administration's broader trade strategy. The New York Times, that leans left, Trump's action makes skeptically writing, it's unclear whether the trend will persist, and saying many economists have viewed Trump's focus on tariffs as simplistic or wrong. Again, like I said, time's going to tell how this all really shakes out in the favor of the American people, because people are still like, I still can't afford my groceries, I still can't afford my rent, and they're not wrong. I mean, like, poof, it's still brutal out there for a lot of people. It's very sad, you know. But again, with anything, like I was saying the other day, if we can get fuel under control, I think that's going to start helping with some of the goods that we purchase at the grocery store. But again, whenever you have these moments of inflation, retailers take advantage of that. So it's like if they brought something up by $1, do you think they're going to take it back down $1? They might bring it down 50 cents, but they don't want to lose that profit margin. I'm just saying. What we're here. What gas used to be, 25 cents a gallon? Anybody remember that? Like 25, 50 cents a gallon? And then once it got over $1, that's it. It stayed there. Once it got over $2, that's it. It's stayed there. Now in Oklahoma right now, I think you can still get gas for $1.99. I was looking on my Gas Buddy app. I was like, okay, cool. It's under $2 somewhere in the country. But in a lot of places in the country, it's not where it used to be, is all I'm saying. And that's part of it. Once they get people conditioned to paying more, they're not going to go back, even if fueling costs come down, because they've gotten used to overcharging us anyway. Just saying. I'm just saying. Now, here's another one. Are job numbers worse than reported? You know what? It wouldn't shock me, and I'd be okay with it because we had the government shutdown. Yeah, the numbers are bad. Like, and here's my thing. I would rather you tell me the truth than a beautiful lie. Just saying. Just be honest. Do not tell beautiful lies. But, beautiful lies are, what unfortunately keep the market going. Just saying. So the Federal Reserve cut interest rates for a third time this year, and I read that yesterday. Jerome Powell said that this cut was partially motivated by the possibility that U.S. job gains have been overestimated throughout the year. Now, on Wednesday, Powell said, "We think there's an overstatement in these numbers, claiming that federal data may have overestimated growth by about 60,000 jobs per month." He suspects that more accurate data would reveal an average net loss, okay, of 20,000 jobs per month since April. And again, I'm I would rather be told the truth than a beautiful lie. Because there are a lot of people, if they were unemployed, they may have stopped looking. And sometimes, again, like they don't count those people. So, for context, the Wall Street Journal explained that because collecting jobs data, particularly from newly created or newly closed businesses, is so complex, the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses a statistical model to estimate these numbers. Though the Bureau has laid out a new plan for estimation that will go into effect in February, Powell suggested that the current numbers may be too good to be true. And like I said, I'm okay with that because I think, probably in February, it was mid-February, March, we'll get some better concrete data, because you got to think, okay, business is closed and we had the government shutdown, which affected a lot more people than we thought, right? People stopped looking for work. There's a lot of different factors. We need the truth, not a beautiful lie. So, though outlets on the right frequently covered the Fed's interest rate cut, all sides was unable to find right-leaning coverage of Powell's statements about exaggerated job numbers at the time of publication. Outlets on the left focused coverage on the Trump administration's potential role in the inaccurate numbers, with the New Republic that leans left writing in its headline that the Trump administration may be seriously exaggerating job numbers. NBC News that leans left highlighted Powell's fears about the job market and also mentioned that President Trump's tariffs were a large contributor to higher prices on consumer goods. The Wall Street Journal focused the most on the alleged discrepancy in job numbers, noting a variety of issues the Labor Department has faced in 2025. Yeah. And Beyond Skeptical said a bit of honesty would be nice. Absolutely. Honesty goes a long way. It really does. But again, we're told beautiful lies, so the market stays stable. Right? We're told beautiful lies so that our enemies, aren't always aware of what we're doing. I'm telling you, the Smith Modernization Act just kicked down the door with propaganda. Yes, we are propagandized. And it's something that needs to be addressed. I would appreciate if, the Trump administration would address it. But are people in there really going to do it when they're benefiting from it? Just saying. There are people that benefit from this. So we always have to ask that further question, right? So with that, we're going to get into our prayer for Friday, praying for Thanksgiving and cover going into the weekend. So God, thank you so much for this amazing Friday, getting us through the week, making sure that we get back and forth to work safely with our families, our health. Father, just thank you for our country. It's not perfect, and we are not perfect people. And it is our intent to make sure that we do the best we can do with what we've been given, and to do right by each other in that and not wrong, God. We really just want to pray for cover going into the weekend, just praying for people's safety, their families' health. God, again, because there are parts of our country where people are dealing with inclement weather, lots of snow, it's cold in different places, praying that people are able to be somewhere where it's warm, where it's dry. Father, And again, just really praying for, you know, peace in our country, because there's so much anger and there's so much bitterness. And I really do think there's a way for us to, you know, argue things out without without hating each other and doing it. Have very intense debate without shouting one another down and calling each other names and just, you know, causing more friction. There's a way to do it. So I'm just grateful again for everything that you're doing for us, everything that you continue to do, God. And again, like I said, we're thanking you. Please give us cover going into the weekend, and please keep everyone safe. It's in Jesus' name we pray and give thanks. Amen. And with that, thank you guys so much for joining me here on Prayer with Fridays. We'll be back on Monday for a recap Monday with some more news. But again, thank you so much for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News. And Beyond Skeptical says amen. Amen to you too. So again, thanks for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News. And remember, stay well, stay focused, and stay unfiltered. We'll see you in the next one.